So, the year is 1545. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent had already passed its midpoint, but he still had plenty of strength to deal with his long-standing rivals, the Habsburgs and the Safavids. And today you are in for the final episode of this series. Welcome to the Amazing History channel, where we tell you about the most interesting moments from the history of the ancient world, the medieval East, and much more. Before I continue, please don't forget to support the channel through sponsorship on YouTube or Patreon. We would also appreciate your likes, subscriptions, and of course, your kind comments. Let's get to today's topic. Suleiman the Magnificent went down in history not only for his military conquests, but also for the numerous reforms that strengthened and modernized the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan sought to create a just legal system, which earned him the nickname Kanuni, meaning the lawgiver. He reformed Ottoman legislation by combining Sharia law with customary law and the Sultan's decrees. Suleiman also reformed the provincial administration system by dividing the empire into governed provinces and ayalets, and established strict control over local governors. The tax system was revised. Fixed tax rates were established, which helped curb abuses by tax collectors and lessen the burden on the peasant population. Suleiman also strengthened the army, increased its size, and improved its organization. He reorganized the Janissary Corps, strengthening the discipline and combat effectiveness of this elite force. Suleiman actively supported architectural projects, funding the construction of mosques, hospitals, schools, and public baths. He promoted the development of culture, art, and science by inviting artists and scholars from different parts of the empire and other countries. After signing another truce with the Habsburgs, Suleiman once again began a campaign against the Iranian Shah Tahmasp. In 1548, the Sultan's army penetrated deep into Iran and temporarily occupied Isfahan. In the following years, military actions continued with varying success. But overall, the campaign did not bring Suleiman any tangible results. He returned home empty-handed, except for the capture of the border town of Van and some rich spoils. While Suleiman was fighting in the east, the ruler of vassal Transylvania, Isabella, under pressure from Ferdinand, agreed to return Transylvania to the Kingdom of Hungary in exchange for lands in Silesia. The Sultan learned about this and in March 1552 launched a new campaign against the Habsburgs. As expected, outposts and fortresses fell like dominoes under the onslaught of the superior Ottoman force. In September, they approached the small fortress of Eger and set up camp nearby, preparing for a siege. Few expected that the fortress garrison, numbering only about 2,000 men led by the 50-year-old commander István Dobo, would put up serious resistance. The men and women in the fortress were native Hungarians. Despite their oath to King Ferdinand, they fought not for glory, but to protect their home. The Ottomans expected an easy victory, but the bravery of the fortress defenders led them to repel repeated enemy attacks. Primitive but deadly grenades and bombs the size of a powder barrel were used against the attackers, as well as a watermill wheel filled with gunpowder, sulfur, and stones, which they rolled into the Ottoman ranks and detonated. For 39 days, the defenders repelled attacks from the superior enemy forces. Even after the tower with the gunpowder supplies exploded and caused significant damage, the Ottomans were still unable to enter the castle. Meanwhile, the morale in the Ottoman camp was at an all-time low. Food rations were cut, and heavy autumn rains began, turning living conditions in the camp into a real hell. As a result, the Ottoman army was forced to retreat. Against all odds, the Hungarian defenders of Eger achieved victory. Thanks to their heroism, the Habsburgs maintained their positions in northern Hungary, and once again Suleiman failed to drive his persistent rivals out of the region. On the other hand, the Ottoman campaign of 1552 was still successful, as they captured another 24 Habsburg fortresses. While the Ottomans were distracted by another war with the Habsburgs, the Safavid Shah Tahmasp once again made his presence felt on their eastern border. In that same year, 1552, he launched a campaign with the goal of reclaiming recently lost territories. In response, Suleiman appointed his Grand Vizier Rustem Pasha as commander and at the end of September 1552 sent him to Anatolia to gather and organize the troops. The Sultan's health was poor, and unrest began among the Janissaries, who supported Prince Mustafa, the Sultan's eldest son. And here we return once again to Roxolana. She understood that Mustafa, being the eldest son and popular among the army and the people, would likely become the heir to the throne. This caused her concern, since Mustafa could get rid of both Roxolana and her children. As a mother, she wanted to see only her own sons on the throne, of whom only two remained by that time, Selim and Bayezid. Therefore, with the help of her ally Rustem Pasha, Roxolana organized a campaign to discredit Mustafa, convincing Suleiman that his son was plotting to seize power. In August 1553, after all Ottoman preparations for war with the Persians had been completed, the Sultan and his army left Constantinople and headed east. On the way, the Sultan ordered Shehzade Mustafa to join him in Eregli, where the army planned to set up camp. Mustafa arrived with his troops and came to his father to greet the Sultan and express his obedience. But Suleiman was angry with him for his alleged rebellious actions. And when Mustafa entered the imperial tent, the Sultan ordered the executioners to strangle him. This event shocked the soldiers, as many of them had hoped that Mustafa would become Suleiman's heir because he was considered the most competent, beloved, and respected son of his father. The Janissaries were especially angry at Rustam. Probably in an attempt to boost the army's fallen morale, the Sultan dismissed him from his post and appointed the second vizier Ahmed Pasha in his place. Then the army left Eregli to winter in Aleppo and prepare for war the following spring. In 1554, the Sultan left his winter camp in Aleppo and moved east, reaching Karabakh. This time, the Ottomans, imitating the Persians, used scorched earth tactics in those border areas from where the Persians launched their raids. However, the cohesion of the Safavid army allowed them to fight more effectively against the Ottomans and carry out offensive raids. This turn of events convinced both sides that the long conflict had reached a deadlock and that it was necessary to put an end to the endless war. The result was the Peace of Amasya, concluded in 1555 and named after the city where it was ratified. According to its terms, Western Georgia and Arab Iraq went to the Ottoman Empire, while Eastern Georgia went to the Safavid state. In 1558, Roxolana died. For Suleiman, this was a great tragedy that affected his health and habits. He became withdrawn and ascetic. That same year, Charles V, his eternal rival, also died. It seemed that Suleiman's life had revolved around their rivalry. The decline of his life and his reign began. Back in the distant year of 1522, Suleiman took Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller, and, symbolically, it turned out that the struggle with them marked the end of his life as well. After being expelled from Rhodes, the Knights of St. John wandered across Europe for several years in search of a new home, until in 1530, Emperor Charles V granted them the island of Malta, along with Gozo and Tripoli. From there, the Hospitallers resumed their corsair activities against the Ottomans, and by 1550 had once again become a serious obstacle for Suleiman. The task of eliminating the threat from the Hospitallers was assigned to Turgut Reis, also known as Dragut. In 1551 he struck at the Knights, devastating the island of Gozo and enslaving almost its entire population. But after attempting to take the much more heavily fortified island of Malta, the Knights fought him off. After that, Dragut captured the Knights' garrison in Tripoli and used it for raids. Over the next few years, Dragut managed to capture part of the Balearic Islands. He couldn't. In 1560, the Knights joined forces with the Spanish crown, Venice, Genoa, and other countries in an alliance to recapture Tripoli from the Ottomans. However, their fleet was attacked by Dragut at the Battle of Djerba and was defeated. The alliance lost dozens of ships and at least 15,000 soldiers, and this meant that now there was a power vacuum that the Ottomans could take advantage of. It was obvious that Dragut would soon strike at Malta. The Knights diligently prepared the island for defense. Back in 1557, they elected the cunning Frenchman Jean Parisot de la Valette as their Grand Master. Under his leadership, the Hospitallers rebuilt their fleet, which had been destroyed at Gerba, and began strengthening the defenses of Malta's three main fortresses. All buildings outside the fortress walls in the island's Grand Harbor were destroyed so they wouldn't become shelter for the Ottomans. The local peasants were ordered to gather all the crops and bring them inside the fortress walls. Additional supplies were also brought in from nearby Sicily. The native inhabitants of the island did not have any love for the Knights, whom they considered foreign oppressors. Nevertheless, they were devout Catholics and were ready to defend their home from the Muslims. Therefore, in addition to the Knights, who numbered about 500, another 3,000 Maltese militiamen joined their ranks. And a little later, they were joined by 1,000 professional soldiers sent by Don Garcia de Toledo, the Viceroy of Sicily. Don Garcia also informed La Valette that he was gathering new reinforcements, but until their arrival, Malta would have to hold out on its own. Meanwhile, the Knights resumed their acts of piracy. Their boldness at sea dealt the Turks many humiliating blows, which only strengthened Suleiman's resolve to destroy the Maltese Knights. Sultan Suleiman entrusted the command of the island assault to his trusted fourth vizier, Mustafa Pasha. With him were the admirals Piale Pasha and Dragut. Most sources believe that the total strength of the Ottoman army was about 40,000 men. The large Turkish fleet approached the islands on May 18, 1565, and headed for the southern coast. There, the Ottoman Armada landed its forces a few kilometers south of the Grand Harbor, thus establishing a foothold. All summer, the Ottomans unsuccessfully assaulted the bastions of Malta, suffering significant losses. And when, on September 7th, the promised reinforcements of 8 men sent by Don Garcia landed on the island, it became clear that the siege had failed. Seeing this force, the Ottomans completely lost heart and retreated to their ships. By September 13th, their army had completely withdrawn from Malta. The defenders lost 2,500 soldiers and a third of the island's population. Meanwhile, the Ottomans lost at least 10,000 men, with some sources claiming up to 30,000. It is said that Suleiman, upon learning of the defeat, said bitterly, "You lost because I was not on the battlefield." The significance of the Great Siege of Malta cannot be overstated. It is impossible to know what would have happened if the island had fallen, but it is quite likely that the Ottoman Empire could have expanded into Italy and then into Western Europe. In 1566, the elderly and gout-stricken Suleiman gathered his army, intending to strike Eger once again. He intended to take revenge for the previous defeat and then continue on to Vienna. But since Suleiman was already too weak to personally command the troops, the actual leadership of the army passed into the hands of the ambitious Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha. At the head of the local Balkan army was his nephew, Mustafa Beylerbey of Bosnia. While Suleiman and his Grand Vizier were marching toward Eger, a small Habsburg army, consisting mainly of Croats, struck at Siklos. This detachment was led by Miklos Zrinyi, who had fought with distinction at the siege of Vienna decades earlier. After the victory at Siklos, he ordered the execution of the Ottoman commander, Sanjak Bey Muhammad. This enraged Suleiman. The affront caused by his execution, combined with the threat that Zrinyi posed in southern Hungary, forced the main Ottoman army to change course and focus on destroying Zrinyi at his base in Szigetvár. Szigetvár did not hold much strategic value for Suleiman's current campaigns, especially considering that the Habsburg army was gathering in Vienna. He expected the siege to be short, since fewer than 3,000 men in Szigetvár were facing an army of more than 100,000. Suleiman arrived at Szigetvár on August 5, 1566. The fortress had an unusual layout which made it a difficult target to reach. It was divided into 3 parts: the Old Town, the New Town, and the Citadel, each located on a separate island connected only by narrow passages. A nearby river fed an artificial lake that surrounded the 3 fortress islands. It took the Turks 3 days to capture the New Town, but its defenders retreated to the Old Town. Its siege was much more difficult. But by August 19th, the Ottomans had also captured the Old Town. The remaining defenders retreated to the last citadel. Wanting to save time, the ailing Suleiman offered Zrinyi favorable terms of surrender. If he surrendered the citadel, he would become the ruler of all Croatia, which was under Ottoman vassalage. Zrinyi, despite the seemingly hopeless situation, ignored the offer and gave no response to the Ottomans, deciding to fight to the last. Taking advantage of the shallow water, the Ottoman army used debris to build their own dams in order to open new avenues of attack. The sappers managed to blow up part of the wall, creating a huge breach. Zrinyi understood that the end was near, as an Ottoman attack through the breach could happen at any moment, and his exhausted forces would not be able to fight back. But to his surprise, there was a lull. For some reason, the Ottoman army remained in place. There was no signal to attack. For the ordinary Ottoman soldiers, the delay was just as much of a mystery. Only Sokolu Mehmed Pasha and his closest circle knew the real reason for the delay. Suleiman the Magnificent died in his tent at the age of 72. Out of fear that news of his death might undermine morale, Mehmed kept it secret for 8 days, even having the Sultan's personal physician strangled. Zrinyi decided to take advantage of the pause and break out of the trap with his remaining strength, but this desperate attempt was doomed to fail. He was beheaded, and the head was sent as a trophy to the new Sultan, who was Selim, the son of Roxolana. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent was one of the most brilliant periods in the history of the Ottoman Empire. His military campaigns significantly expanded the borders of the empire, incorporating territories in the Balkans, North Africa, and the Middle East. Suleiman's domestic policy was characterized by the strengthening of centralized power, reforms in legislation, and the development of infrastructure, which contributed to the prosperity of the economy and culture. At the same time, his reign laid the foundations for future conflicts and challenges that the Ottoman Empire would face in the following centuries. But we'll talk about that some other time, okay? That's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in future episodes on this channel. Bye! But we'll talk about that some other time, okay? That's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in future episodes on this channel. Bye. Пока.